Greetings everyone. Welcome to Top Tier Tips. Alright, last session we went over the move details, which is basically just this fancy box here, which gives you all the details of pretty much almost any sort of data you have to know with regards to a combat or using your character, or any sort of details that relate to match-related things during the match. Alright, before we end up going on, I do recommend that you check out any of the previous sessions that I've gone over so far with regards to top tier tips. Other sessions including movement, the new cancel, and of course the aforementioned move details. So if you haven't checked those out before, it would be very helpful to check those out too. But anyways, I'm going to be carrying on with this week's topic. This week I'm going to be going over frame advantage. Alright, so yeah, like what I said about frame advantage, we're going to be talking about frames today. What frames is basically just a fancy term for reducing everything that happens during a DOA5 match to numbers. These include both positive and negative numbers. Alright, so now referring to your new favorite box, the move details box, you may want to get comfortably acquainted with the advantage display. I mean the little section there you see to the top right, where it says just an advantage in all capital letters. As has been implied in the previous section, every action taken in DOA5 or DOA5 last round requires frames. Think of it as kind of like a frames dispenser. I mean, well, to put things in perspective, DOA5 runs at 60 frames per second, abbreviated to FPS. And no, that doesn't mean first-person shooter. Alright, and this means that if there's 60 frames per second, that means that one frame would be a really impossibly fast 1/60th of a second. Kind of mind-boggling to fathom having a conception of how fast that actually is. But believe it or not, there are some fighting game players that claim that they can see one frame, which of course is incredibly handy for timing what's considered just frame moves, which are moves that have to be performed pretty much almost to the frame or within a very tight frame window without any mashing being allowed. But yeah, those people that can do that are usually would be considered like high-level tournament players, who are basically different players that have a very high reliance on their understanding of frames to be able to play a game like DOA5 last round at a high level. So knowing how frames work is definitely, in my opinion, can make the difference between a good player or an exceptional one. Alright, so just going back to that to the advantage display of the move details. Try messing around with your character syntax and see what numbers that appear in that box, in that little section there. So if I end up doing something like pressing P with Kasumi and I connect on normal hit, the display should show -2, as you can see right there. This means that Kasumi's 5P is -2 on normal hit, though her 5P, also just simply called her P, executes in 9 frames, which means that it's very fast in itself and has a very mild recovery. I mean, right there in the frame display for the third number under frame, it shows that it has 13 frames of recovery. I mean, on well, to also put in perspective, on the opponent's block, it would be -3. I mean, because I'll just say as a general rule of thumb, under most circumstances, a move on block is going to be more negative than a move on, say, normal hit. I mean, there are probably like very few instances where a move is actually There are actually very few instances when a move is actually more negative on normal hit than it is on block, such as with Bass's 5K, but that's generally considered a huge exception and not the rule. I mean, the rule of thumb is that if you block a move, if your move gets blocked, you're going to be at a lot of negative frames, or you're going to be at more negative frames than if it hits on normal hit. All right, moving along. So, just continuing on here, just using Kasumi's jab or 5P as an example. So basically, technically speaking, when I hit the opponent with P, I'm at -2, which means that any subsequent attack that I take, I mean, well, excluding obviously doing follow-ups within the string, but let's say I'm just doing P, any other move I do will end up requiring an extra 2 frames to execute if I just do a single. If I do a P, then 6P. The 6P normally, as you can see on the move details, is normally 11 frames. But if I end up doing something that leaves me at -2, I mean, this is not just a jab, but this can also be if you just do a poke on block. But I mean, just in general, if you are left at -2, your next move is 2 frames slower, meaning that 11 frames would be 13 frames. So her 6P, after doing a -2 move, her 6P becomes 13 frames. I mean, even though with this example, I mean, even if your 6P is 13 frames, it's still pretty fast, but it does give the opponent an opportunity to kind of strike back. I mean, this is assuming that you're just doing just a single P, but you get the idea. So, for instance, if Kasumi does a P and then Momoji, and she hits Momoji, and if Momoji reads the free cancel and believes Kasumi won't do a follow-up in the string like PP, then she can technically 5P Kasumi back, or she could jab her back, since all of Kasumi's attacks will be 2 frames slower. I mean, with the example of for instance, like her jab now become in I-11 as opposed to in I-9. And Momoji's 5P is I-10. And of course, 10 is a smaller number than 11. I mean, rudimentary math. So in essence, after Kasumi does a single P to Momoji, Kasumi will be at a slight disadvantage, and Momoji's 5P will be able to beat out any attack Kasumi does besides attacks with high crushing capability. These negative frames on normal hits are in place to discourage free cancel abuse and cheap frame traps off of a quick poke, so you can't just keep doing that over and over and your opponent not being able to do something about it. So as a result, most moves that are within a string are usually negative on are usually kind of a negative on normal hit. I mean, it's usually moves at the end of a string that tend to be positive on normal hit. But any move usually within a string tends to be negative. So if you can call out an opponent on a free cancel, you do get a very small window to be able to kind of quote unquote strike back, or even if it's like as much as you see if I do like 3 jabs or PP 6P or PPP with Kasumi, I'll be at -8. On paper, technically you could throw punish that with up to a 7-frame throw, but the thing is that punishing a free cancel is not considered a guaranteed punish. It's called a punish by read, meaning that it's obviously a risk doing it. Like it's not guaranteed punishment. It's almost entirely considered a read to punish or strike back on that. So as you could probably guess now, I mean, being able to read your opponent is a huge part of Dead or Alive 5. So these are good things to keep out in mind. So I mean, with kind of understanding like how the frames work in general, you'll be able to get a better kind of feel for being able to call out free cancels or be able to kind of read what your opponent doing. I mean, so basically, if you kind of know what the frames are in your head, you can kind of get an idea for for how many frames you have to work with against your opponent. Like, and I know this is a kind of like, I know this can kind of be like tricky stuff to get a handle on, but once you kind of go through frames and get a feel for how a flow of a match is, you can get the you end up get an idea of how this works. All right, just gonna switch out to Sumi. Oh yeah, and I also forgot to say it's Momoji's birthday today, so I'd like everyone to wish her a nice happy birthday in the comments if you can. And and also as a result, I'm also going to be showing off the beautiful forest stage here, since Momoji's name does mean autumn or autumn leaves. But anyways, let's continuing on with frames. In general, when you're going about starting your offense in DOA5, including last round, you generally want to try and score a counter hit. Alright, so I mean, if you're practicing, you can set the counter to always counter to get the idea. So a counter hit is... well, a counter hit is usually scored when you end up intercepting an opponent's movement. You either hit them during their movement, like a sidestep or a backdash or a forward dash, or you beat out their strike before their strike hits you. Like, those will generally score counter hits. Counter hits are almost always, like, majority of the time, will be positive frame advantage, and will almost always be like, if I counter hit with my jab with Ayane, I get +3. If I were doing it on just normal hits, it's just neutral, just 0. So as you see, counter hit gives you more frame advantage. I mean, technically speaking, there are still moves that could be negative even on counter hit, but again, that's considered the exception, not the rule. So with counter hit, you tend to get frame advantage. You can sometimes get a lot of frame advantage. A big aspect about scoring counter hits is a lot of moves that would normally just be like a negative non-stun on normal hit will become a stun on counter hit, sometimes even like a big stun. Like something like Ayane's like 6P, for instance, gives you a +23 stun on counter hit. On normal hit, it's just a -8 strike. I mean, well, because they're string follow-ups, you're pretty much not gonna get punished for doing it, but it's still not advantage. But here, just with Ayane though, I mean, if you do want to try and start, I mean, having this ability is good also, but if you do want to kind of start your stun game on characters like 5K or KK, usually is positive on normal hit. Like with the example of Ayane's 5KK, on either normal hit or counter hit or any hit status, usually it will stun. Depending on distance, it will usually give you +26 or +27 if you can manage to hit it at tip range, since you usually get a little extra frame of advantage, or you get one less frame of disadvantage if you can hit something around tip range, because it's not using the full frames of the move, it's only using partial frames, so we get the illusion of quicker recovery that way. Alright, so just continuing on, I'll just continue on with Ayane's KK. You see, on average, you're usually going to get about +26 frame advantage. This allows you to follow up with quite a bit of options on both, if you score on either normal hit or counter hit. I mean, this is assuming that the stun does not get stagger escape, because if the opponent can stagger escape the stun, particularly on fastest, it will end up reducing the options you can use to follow up on it. After KK, like for me, usually a fairly optimal option to go for after KK is to do like Ayane's 4P+K, which is gives you a pretty high launch off of just simply stunning with KK even on normal hit. I mean, this does allow you to to get pretty big juggles. There you go. You can get over 100 damage on normal hit from just you doing a KK, then launching the 4P plus K. And of course, as soon as you get the opponent in the air, they can't do anything about it but just sit back and eat the damage. I mean, when they're being stunned, they can stagger escape or try and use a critical hold, but getting the high launch though is usually what you want. So, well, just to continue on with 4P plus K, this move connects in. It has a startup frames of 16 frames here, so it's a 16 frame launcher. KK gives you plus 26. With how DOA's frames work, when it comes to connecting strikes with the intention of being able to take advantage of your frame advantage, you have to add 2 frames to your strike. So in order to connect with plus 26, they'll have the kind of illusion that this is actually end up being like an 18 frame move. But of course, 18 is still a smaller number than 26, so this move will connect during stun if the opponent doesn't stagger escape it fast enough. So if the opponent isn't able to stagger escape it, let's say on about, let's say to show an example, if I were to stagger escape it on fast. Alright, this move will still, the move will still connect on fast, meaning that fastest is probably where it's going to be the, yeah, it won't connect properly on fastest. I mean, it technically can connect, but you have to be, because of the kind of when someone stagger escapes, they kind of creep back a bit. It won't connect them consistently. I mean, if you have them like backed in a corner and with really tight, then it could connect. But generally speaking, if you stagger escape on fast, you can get out of it. So basically, the general rule of thumb is that if you can't, if a stun mix-up, you can't stagger escape fast enough out of it, it pretty much becomes what's called a must-hold situation. So what this means is that the opponent will need to use the correct hold. In this case, a mid punch or a mid punch hold in order to be able to escape the situation, and able to escape the situation without taking further damage. Because if you're unable to stagger escape fast enough, your only other option is to do a critical hold, or you could try and read an attempt at a throw and to, well, simply do nothing. Well, do nothing, or you could still try and stagger escape anyway to reduce the stun. But yeah, if you are put into situations where your opponent has a lot of frame advantage and you are stunned, then it is considered a must-hold situation. But yeah, so if you want to kind of see like if someone's stagger escaping. All right, I have it on fastest. You'll notice the opponent will if you could see it, the opponent kind of vibrates a bit to show that they're slow escaping or stagger escaping. So if you can manage to see that, then you can kind of tell that you're gonna have to, if you're gonna follow up, you have to do 2 things. You're either gonna be going for a fast, follow up, or if you read it as stagger escape, you can also like go for a throw. But that's just part of kind of the meta game with regards to stagger escapes. Because generally how you tend to deal with stagger escapes is you can change the timing of your moves. So I mean, because you're assuming someone's a stagger escape, and you're probably not going to get as much in terms of like stun follow-ups. So what you can do is kind of go for like resets. Like try and throw someone who stagger escapes a lot. So but to be able to kind of know how effective a stagger escape is, of course you're going to have to know the frames to know how much, for instance, a fastest stagger escape will reduce a stun, for instance. Well, going on with like Ione's like KK, an example, if the opponent does stagger on fastest, you could use another launcher like her 4P, but you don't get as good a reward, but it's still an option of other moves you can use, since her 4P is a 15 frame launcher. Yeah, but you kind of get the idea though that during different stun situations, you have to kind of look at different moves. Obviously, priority should go to moves that have fast startup times, but also either have pretty good rewards when they do like launch the opponent, or they induce like further stuns, such as giving you good frame advantage and with a higher critical level, like critical level 3 for instance. But yeah, the stun game in itself, coupled with it can be quite complex because of when you combine it with the frames. There's a lot of different numbers you have to keep in mind, and you also have to keep in mind like what different options your opponent can have, like whether they are able to stagger escape, like what kind of like critical holds they can do, like which moves are like optimal to do during stun. So there's a lot of things to think about when applying like stun mix-ups with regards to different kind of frames from both ends. So I mean, generally speaking, of course, working frame advantage during stun is considered a large balancing act between mixing up your opponent with follow-up attacks of various hit levels, such as like highs, mid punches, mid kicks, and even some lows, such as like a counter hit 2K, which for most characters, a counter hit 2K will cause a trip stun, which will give you a pretty solid amount of frame advantage, whereas on normal hit 2Ks are usually negative, and then don't do much damage either. So I mean, it's kind of like a small as a small recap. The main things that you want to think of during stun is frame advantages or frames during stun. How much is the stun affected by stagger escape, and anticipating what potential critical holds an opponent may do to try and escape the stun. So basically, the follow-up actions you take after initiating the stun need to take these elements into consideration. I mean, also, like I also said earlier, you can tell if an opponent is stagger. You can tell if an opponent is stagger escaping is if you see them vibrating back a little bit. I mean, the kind of benefit also from that vibrating back is that short-range pokes may not connect as well, because if you end up using a shorter range move and it ends up hitting around tip range, it might actually end up connecting on a later frame than the aforementioned like 15 frames. An example could be even with like if I were to use a guard break with Ione that gives plus 19, technically anything 17 frames or faster should connect, but sometimes her 4P may not connect depending on this distance. See, I mean, technically speaking, a 15 frame move should be connecting, but at a further distance it may not connect well, and this is also compounded by some differences with close stance and open stance, which do change the frames. Generally speaking, with when you're fighting an opponent, you tend to get better hit properties if you're fighting in close stance, which is when they have their lead foots are pointing to the opposite side, as opposed to open stance when their lead legs are pointing towards each other. With open stance, you don't necessarily get as good hit properties. Like you usually, instead of getting like for instance a limbo stun, you get a gut stun, which an opponent has the capability to hold out of. In a close stance, you can get the much favorable limbo stun. I mean, just little things like that. I mean, even these. I mean, just yeah. So being in close stance or open stance can change up how the frames function. But a good rule of thumb is to try and find ways to try and, if you can pay attention to it, to try and maintain combat in close stance. This open stance is obviously better for, well, defensive purposes, since you don't get as useful hit properties on in open stance. But generally speaking, though, an interesting thing to keep in note is if an opponent is stunned, they're considered to be in guess mode, which means that they aren't in reaction mode and are less likely to react to something compared to when they're anticipating a certain follow-up. So as soon as an opponent starts to expect a certain setup, mix things up accordingly with a different setup, or even just a change of timing in how you flow during a setup, which can be used to bait holds, leaving the opponent open to high counter throws for massive damage. So I'll just state it again. When an opponent is in guess mode, they aren't in reaction mode. What that means is that a move that would generally be reactable under an example is that a move that would generally be reactable during stun it may be harder to react to. For instance, like the second hit of Ione's 6k 2k. If you expect it, you can actually hold the second hit even if the first hit stuns you, but if you end up mixing up your pokes well, then you can usually sneak that in. So that's usually how another way how mix-ups can work in DOA is trying to give your opponent quite a bit to think about, so they don't end up predicting your rhythm and end up reacting to moves that could appear as more difficult to react to if they have multiple things to have to think about. Alright, but for a different thing now, alright, just gonna change things up a little bit. Now I'm gonna be going on to dealing with a blocking opponent. Alright, when dealing with a blocking opponent, you either want to poke them with string delays and free cancels, or including low pokes like 2Ps, relatively quick guard breaks, or to throw them. If you're choosing to poke into their block, the preference should be towards moves that are either advantage on block, neutral, or like a slight disadvantage, like no more than about -3, -4, because once you start, you can get away with a -5, but then it's harder to maintain your offense if you start leaving yourself at like -5, -6, -7, and further on before you even start becoming fully punishable. So an example of a character that does tend to have quite a bit of block pressure is Christie does tend to have quite a bit. So if you end up attacking into an opponent's block, actually let me switch the characters around so I can set the opponent to a block-in stance. Alright, as I said it earlier, Christie is a character that does tend to make use of offensive pressure quite a bit. In terms of frames. Alright, on paper, obviously a lot of Christie's moves are negative or even like punishable on block, but she tends to have a lot of she has a lot of free cancel capability, so technically speaking, she's not very commonly going to be throw punished mid-string unless an opponent calls her out on it. Like I said earlier, to punish a free cancel, it's usually done on a read as opposed to on reaction. Unless it ends up being something that has like that usually ends up having quite a bit of a difference or delay between whether a move is completed or whether it free cancels, such as something like Kasumi's her Hoshimpo stance KK. Because if you just do Hoshimpo K, you can end up like seeing her falling down. So you can usually tell if she's just doing the K or if finishing with KK. But under most circumstances, it can be risky to punish a free cancel because of delays, of string delays and different things like that. I mean, in Dead or Alive 5, I mean, string delays can be really strong in this game, so that is something you have to watch out for, which you will get more of used to with experience. But alright, just to continue on with example of moves you can use kind of like if you're just poking an opponent. I mean, with Christy, you could do things like her PP, but if you're just thinking more in terms of frames, a move like her 9P, or up forward P, is a 14 frame high punch that is 0 on block. So being 0 on block means that she's able to continue her offense. Like I did bring that up in the previous video, but it does apply here. So if you manage to kind of connect this on an opponent's block, you don't have to stop your offense there. You can basically continue on, and when you have strike speeds as fast as with a 9 frame jab and an 11 frame mid punch, you can basically attack almost any character like right after, meaning that the opponent will have to, generally speaking, the opponent will either have to read you correctly or will have to take some sort of a defensive action because you're not leaving yourself at enough negative frames for your opponent to be able to take advantage of. So, I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, I mean, just between these two characters here. Alright, so with Ayane, she has a good poking tool that she has is her 2P, which would be, it's 0 on hit. I mean, it is -4 on block, but I mean, at 12 frames, it's unreactable, so an opponent is only going to block it on read. You can't react to 12 frames. So that means under most circumstances, the opponent's just standing there blocking. You can shake them up with a 2P, which leaves you at 0. I mean, against a character like Christy, technically, yes, she can outpoke you with their 9 frame jab or 11 frame mid, but if you just keep doing 2P, the only thing basically that Christy could really do under most circumstances would be like 6 PPU back, so you can do 2P then like a mid punch hold. I mean, if you suspect, because obviously 2P will beat out highs. They could sidestep you, but 2P does recover fairly quickly. So, although you don't generally find most instances of people sidestepping 2Ps, but for characters that have fast 2Ps that are like 12 or 13 frames and either like 0 or even +1 on block, like Ein's 2P is a 13 frame 2P that is a +1 on hit, not on block, then you can use these to try and to open an opponent out. In most 3D fighters, 2Ps are actually, or the equivalent 2As, 2Ps, whatever, are usually considered special lows, which mean that they can be block standing. But in DOA, 2Ps are considered natural lows, so you can use them to open an opponent up that is just standing there blocking. There are some people that don't necessarily kind of like that aspect of DOA, but I think it does make the open an opponent up more interesting, because generally other 3D fighters, you can't use a 2P to open someone up. A 2P is simply used to try and interrupt their offense, then to get your offense started. In DOA, you can still do that, but there are generally some frames used to crouch, so it can be a little bit more challenging to instant high crush some strings in DOA, but it's still there. But in like other 3D fighters, they tend to have fast where crouching requires a bit more frames than this, like at least 4 or 5 frames. So 2Ps are not necessarily used as frequently in the same way, but they still are very potent in DOA5. I mean, with Ayane, it's an example of probably one of the best 2Ps in the game. I mean, just to put it in like perspective. I mean, let's say you're fighting someone slower, like the super heavyweights, for instance, like a Bash or a Leon or even a Rachel. because they lack a 12 frame 2P themselves, and their mids are 13 frames or slower. Technically speaking, you can 2P them repeatedly, and the only thing they have to take some sort of defensive action to beat it out, such as a low hold, or to low block it so you'll be at a disadvantage. But yeah, if your character does have a 12 frame 2P, these can become crazy useful against people that have 13 frame or slower mids. Alright, so but with regards to guard break pressure, what you usually want to do is either space the guard break a bit outside of the opponent's range of their quicker pokes, or find a way to lock the opponent up on the defensive when they're kind of frozen from taking any sort of action. Like sometimes if the opponent looks petrified or something, like, oh, what the hell is this guy doing? They might just freeze up. Then you can start to work in slower moves. I mean, as you can guess, most guard breaks tend to be slower moves. I mean, they're either well, on average, they're slower moves or moves that might have to do out of a stance. I mean, there are characters like Akira that can have really fast guard breaks. Like his 6P plus K is a really fast but high guard break. But guard breaks that tend to hit mid, or even the case of Ayane has her 1 H plus K is actually a low guard break, which are quite uncommon, but of course it's a pretty slow move. So you have to use these guard breaks when you have the opponent kind of locked up, because as you can guess, most guard breaks are positive on blocks. I mean, but in DOA5, you do have to watch out that some characters, usually the kind of grapplers or super heavyweights, tend to have guard breaks that are even negative on block. I mean, you have to watch out, but usually in that case, the guard break is used to make a move that would normally be unsafe safe. And then there's actually even examples of guard breaks that are actually punishable, such as Marie's special side step minuet P plus K, but that's just considered the exception. Under most instances, guard breaks are positive. Sometimes guard breaks are positive enough that they can even guarantee follow-ups. Like for instance, with Christie's 4P plus K, it gives you plus 10. Unfortunately, because you need an extra 2 frames to connect, I would need at least plus 11 to guarantee my jab. So technically with plus 10 I don't get anything, but if I am able to fully charge it, I get plus 15. With plus 15, I can get a guaranteed 6P, or 6PP if I choose so. So if you have guard breaks that can guarantee follow-ups, then that can be really useful to try and find a way to implement into your game plan. Another example of a guard break that can be quite another example of a guard break that pretty much every character has and always gives you quite a bit of positive is a fully charged power blow. Alright, as you probably can guess, the way how you get a power blow is when your health is below 50% and your health bar is flashing. You get access to the power blow, which is indicated by a kind of a wind motion to show that it's charged up. So you have to hold down whatever the power blow input is for about 40 frames for a maximum of 60 frames. And if you get it in between that window, you'll get a guard break that usually gives you enough frame advantage for a guaranteed follow-up. Like for instance, Christie's here gives her plus 14, which gives her a guaranteed 6P again. Most power blows do range between about plus 14 to around plus 17, so almost every character generally is able to get a free 6P off of their power blow guard break. So I mean, this actually kind of shows just how useful power blows can be, in the sense that generally speaking, you don't care if it either hits or gets blocked. If it hits, great, you end up getting minimum 80 damage plus environmental damage. If it gets blocked, oh well, if it gets blocked, you get mix-ups. Even then, you can do power blows again. So I mean, so there's a positive. There's a huge positive guard break for every character there. Unfortunately, you can only use it when your health is below half, but it's good to know it's there, and the power blow can be used like a mind game in itself. Aside from like when an opponent is just simply frozen up, or if you've got them locked down, guard breaks can also tend to work well on like an opponent's wake up, like off the ground, which is so basically using the guard break as okizeme, and of course when spaced well. In other words, you usually need to be at some sort of advantage over your opponent to make raw guard breaks work, or they can usually be defended against like via hold sidestep, or simply being stuck by a faster attack. So yeah, but that's pretty much just it for this session though. So lots of things to look at with regards to frame advantage. So what I want you to do is end up going into lab and see which of your characters' moves are either like safe, neutral, or obviously positive. I mean, if you have a move that's about -5 or less, then you can kind of frame trap your opponent a bit with it, because you're basically, under most circumstances, can't be punished. You can also see how much like pushback a move has. If a move has a lot of pushback, it usually will knock the opponent out of throw range to be able to throw punish you. So that's another thing to be able to look at. But anyway, that's it for this week, and thank you for checking out top tier tips, and don't be sure to comment, rate, and subscribe. Like, let me know how I'm doing, and also let me know of any sort of like future sessions that you may be interested in. So anyway, thanks for checking us out, and I'll see you next time on Top Tier Tips.